Hello and welcome to the Pod Like a Pro podcast. This is the podcast dedicated to sharing tips, tricks and personal experiences so you can podcast like a professional. I'm Nat Little and I'm from Pod and Pen Productions and I'm coming to you from Awabakal country in New South Wales, Australia. This time you're going to hear the personal experience of somebody who's just got their podcast out into the podosphere. It's Mardi Lee from the Renewy Living podcast.
Is it possible for you to do a tiny forest in your backyard?
It is, depending on how big your backyard is. You can certainly do smaller plantings, but a tiny forest is generally about that 200 square metres, so about the size of a tennis court.
What is the Renewy Living podcast?
The Renewy Living podcast is a sustainability podcast that focuses on the community of Newcastle, using community as an exemplar for all the good things we do for people and planet.
How long had you been wanting to make this podcast for?
Oh, funny you ask that, because I look back through my notes and I can see that my idea started in 2021. That's when my Google Sheets spreadsheet started happening, where I jotted down a few points and then just left it on the back burner for quite a while. But, 2021 was also a year of thinking, because that was the second year of COVID. And so there was always this, what can I do next? What can I do to enhance what I'm doing?
Why was it on the back burner for so long?
It was basically the fear of technology. It just seemed that starting a podcast seemed easy, but when I looked into it and Googled it, it was starting to feel really complex. There was so much technology I had to consider about in terms of recording. How do I record? What do I record? What happens next? Like all this behind the scenes stuff that I really didn't know how to start.
So would you say that there was a sense of overwhelm that would hit you when you were looking into how to start it?
A massive overwhelm. I'm a big podcast listener, and so it felt like it was really easy, because when you listen to a podcast, it's all smooth sailing. It's all edited beautifully. But to get to that point, I had no idea. So yeah, it was really overwhelming. Now
that you've done it, you've taken the steps, you've done a course and you've learnt the skills and you've been in the studio recording. How did you find the process up to this point?
That process has been a continual learning process. It was made easier by doing the Pod Like a Pro podcast course, because it's actually meant that I've been able to get into the studio and start recording. Where do I start in terms of how to get to that point? Like, you've done the course, and then after that, like, I've gone into the studio and I've recorded many, many sessions.
Is it making more sense the more that you do it?
It's much easier, and each time I record, I can go in there with a different set of eyes and know that perhaps what I did with the last guest didn't work as well as what I'm going to do with this guest.
So it sounds like you're finding your own style and your own way of doing things. How important is it for you that you have a style and a process that actually fits you and the way that you do things?
It's so important to figure out your own style, and it took me, I think, 3 recordings to figure out at least mine. One of the things that I do with my guests is I do a bit of a brainstorming mind map of what is it about that subject that I know, and what is it that I would like to know, and also feel that my listeners would like to know. And my mind map is pretty crazy. I'm a pen and paper kind of person. Writing is for thinking, and I jot everything down. And so what I've learned is I need to take that mind map into the recording studio with me and work directly from that. It looks like a mess to somebody else, but to me it makes sense, because what I found when I was trying to do my questions or conversations as a linear style, so on an A4 bit of paper with the questions written down, I was quite stagnant in how I was asking the questions. And I also felt like I was catching myself up all the time, struggling that it wasn't a true conversation. Whereas for me, my style is the behind the scenes style, is able to look at that mind map very quickly and go, right, okay, we've talked about this area, this area, this area, and now we can easily segue into that particular topic.
How important is it for you to follow the conversation that you're having with a guest and not just ask question after question?
Again, that's been a massive learning curve for me of how to make the podcast sound conversational rather than question and answer. I'm still learning how to do that well, but it has taken me a little bit of time to listen intently and then try and ask questions based on that. One of the challenges or the things that I need to work on is when a guest has so much juicy information in the one section. I think, where do I start? What question do I need to ask next? Because it is also good and gold information. So figuring that out is also something that I need to work on.
Do you feel that that's something that's going to come easier now than what you thought it would have, now that you've started the process and you're finding your own style?
Yeah, much easier. Knowing that I'm now working with my own mind map, it's not linear. I don't have to ask the questions in order. And listening to the guests is so much easier to ask questions that arise from that, knowing that I've already got the foundations.
How does it feel to be at this point?
I am feeling so much more confident about the direction of the podcast, the direction of the types of guests that would be suitable for the podcast, as well as the listeners.
Is there any advice for people who are thinking about starting a podcast that you'd give at this point?
Oh, advice would be do as much as you can in terms of your own level of research, where you feel comfortable with, and don't be afraid to ask for help. And asking for help could mean doing the podcast course, because podcasting, particularly as a solo host, can be a very isolating feeling. But by doing a course, then at least you've got a little bit of a mini support network to boost you along, to go, it's going to be okay, and it's good to get yourself out there. So yeah, give it a go. I know that feels like a really frequently used adage, isn't it? Like, just give it a go. But it is so true. You only know if something's going to work or not if you do actually give it a go. And once you give it a go, it doesn't have to be perfect. And because this is the other thing I like to say about sustainability, nothing ever needs to be perfect. You can just try and know that there is going to be room for improvement, and then keep on trying again. I've been reading Lee Sales' book, Storytellers, and to become a really good journalist does not happen overnight. There's a lot of learning that needs to go in that. And even though I am not planning to be any kind of Lee Sales, I think taking those words of wisdom from journalists who have been in print or audio media is just take it with a grain of salt and go, yep, I can do that. And then if it doesn't work out, then that's okay. But I'm pretty sure that for a newbie person, just, have a crack.
Just before we wrap up, Mardi, there's a word that I've heard you use in terms of getting your podcast off the ground, and it's that word is accountability. How has that helped you get to this point?
As a solo business owner, accountability is absolutely paramount. When it's very easy for me as a solo person to set my own goals, but having accountability of someone else there is really important, because you know that you can't let that person down. So having due dates, when I did the course with you, having due dates was really important, because it made me actually do it. It's very easy for me to put things off to the side and think, oh yeah, I'll do that later. And then what happens is, like, things don't get done later. So the accountability of doing the course and having due dates and knowing that you're going to release it and saying, okay, these are going to be my launch dates, is really important to me.
What's the one thing that surprised you the most about going through this process to this point?
People are pretty amazing kind of human beings, and everyone is different. I think what surprised me is remembering that I've got a fair amount of people skills and trying to be able to see that as my strength and to utilize that when I'm having conversations with people. I think what also surprised me is that my voice is okay. It's very easy to criticize your own voice. And I think that surprised me because when I talk to people in person, they say, oh, yeah, you'd be good at doing a podcast. You're a great speaker and, you got a good voice. And it's all that self-critical going, do I really? Like, I feel like sometimes I need a thesaurus to help me with what types of words that I need to use. But I think that surprised me. Yeah. My voice is actually not as bad as I thought.
Your voice is you, and I think that's what you need to bring to anything, be it podcast or public speaking or interacting with people. And people, we are always our worst critics when it comes to how we come across and how we sound. So always important to have another set of ears that you could trust as well to give you honest and constructive feedback. Mardi, thank you so much for joining us on the Pod Like a Pro podcast. And you can find the Renewey Living podcast produced and presented by Mardi Lee. You can find the podcast Renewey Living on podcast platforms right now.
You sure can. Thank you so much, Nat.
You're welcome. Thanks, Mardi.
And if you'd like to find out more information about how you can start your podcast or make your podcast sound more professional, head to podandpen.com.au. You can join our newsletter and you can also read about our Pod Like a Pro podcasting course. Until next time, happy listening.